I am 28 years old, and I always believed that love was a quiet thing. It was supposed to be a safe harbor, not a battlefield. My relationship with my husband, Mark, was exactly that. It was easy, comfortable, and filled with a mutual respect that felt like coming home. His family, however, was a different story, specifically his mother, Diana. She was a woman who seemed to be crafted from polished marble and quiet disapproval. In the year Mark and I dated and the 6 months we were engaged, she had never been openly hostile. Instead, she specialized in a kind of subtle undermining that you could never quite call her out on. A compliment that felt like an insult. A helpful suggestion that implied you were incompetent. I tried my best to ignore it. I told myself it was her way, that she was just protective of her only son. I wanted peace, so I smiled, I nodded, and I let it all slide. I thought I could manage her. I thought I could build a bridge. I was wrong. The day of our wedding, she took a sledgehammer to that bridge, and she did it in front of 200 people. The reception was beautiful. Everything felt soft and golden. The lights strung across the ceiling twinkled like captured stars. Mark was by my side, his hand holding mine so tightly, as if he was afraid I might disappear. I felt a deep, profound sense of joy. This was it. This was the beginning of our forever. After the dinner plates were cleared, the clinking of a glass drew everyone's attention to the small stage. It was Diana, holding a microphone. She looked radiant in a silver dress, her smile wide and confident. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, but I pushed it down. It was my wedding day. Nothing could ruin it. "I'd like to say a few words," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. She spoke about Mark's childhood, sharing a few sweet, funny anecdotes that made the guests laugh. She talked about how proud she was of the man he had become. So far, so good. I started to relax. I squeezed Mark's hand and he smiled back at me, his eyes full of love. Maybe I had misjudged her. Maybe she was finally accepting me. Then she turned her gaze directly to me. The smile on her face didn't change, but her eyes held a glint of something sharp and cold. "And I'd like to welcome Laura into our family," she said, her voice ringing with false warmth. She raised her champagne flute. "A toast," she announced to the room. "To my son, who finally found a woman who doesn't lie." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. A few people who weren't paying close attention clapped politely, but a wave of uncomfortable silence quickly spread through the room. My smile froze on my face. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying. The implication was grotesque, a public branding on the happiest day of my life. She was calling me a liar, or at best, damning me with faint praise by comparing me to some phantom liar from Mark's past. Either way, it was a declaration of war. Mark's hand went slack in mine. He looked from his mother to me, a flicker of confusion and shock on his face. He leaned in, his whisper urgent. "What was that?" I couldn't answer. I just stared at Diana, who was now smiling benevolently, as if she had just bestowed upon me the most wonderful blessing. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes meeting mine over the rim of the glass. In that moment, I understood. This was not a mistake. It was not a poorly worded sentiment. It was a perfectly aimed shot designed to humiliate me and establish her dominance from the very first day of my marriage. She was telling me and everyone else that I was on probation, that I was the latest in a line and my position was conditional. The joy I had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger. She had chosen this day, our day, to draw a line in the sand. And as I sat there, under the scrutiny of all our friends and family, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let her get away with it. I didn't know how, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was far from over. I would find out what this was all about, and I would not be the one left standing in the wreckage. My maid of honor, Sarah, found me a few minutes later near the gift table. I was pretending to admire the wrapping on a toaster oven, trying to breathe normally. My chest felt tight, like a band was wrapped around it. "Laura, are you okay?" Sarah asked. Her voice was low and laced with outrage. I tried to force a smile, but I could feel it trembling. "I'm fine," I said. The words tasted like ash. "No, you're not," she insisted. What she did was unbelievable. Who does that at their son's wedding? "Diana, apparently," I said, my voice flat. I finally looked at her, and I knew my eyes were giving away the storm inside me. She wanted to make a point. "Well, point made," Sarah muttered, crossing her arms. "She's a monster. What did Mark say?" "He was shocked," I admitted. "He didn't know what to do." I felt a pang of disappointment, but I pushed it aside. Mark hated confrontation, especially with his mother. He had been blindsided, just like me. It wasn't entirely his fault. Not yet, anyway. "You can't just let this go," Sarah said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. "I'm not going to," I promised her. I looked back across the room where Diana was now laughing with one of her friends, occasionally glancing my way. "I'm not going to let it go, but not tonight. Tonight, I'm going to dance with my husband and eat my wedding cake." It was an act of defiance. I would not let her steal another moment of this day from me. Sarah nodded, her expression softening with sympathy. "Okay," she said. "But tomorrow we strategize." I gave her a grateful look. "Tomorrow," I agreed. As I walked back to the table, an older woman I vaguely recognized as one of Mark's great aunts stopped me. She put a frail, wrinkled hand on my arm. Her eyes were kind. "Dear," she said, her voice a papery whisper, "don't you pay any mind to Diana. She's always been theatrical." The word theatrical struck me. It was such a specific, gentle way of saying she was a drama queen. It suggested a long history of this kind of behavior. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her small act of kindness. "She likes her stories," the aunt added with a knowing little nod. "Just remember that." She patted my arm one more time and then shuffled away, leaving me standing there with her cryptic words echoing in my head. "She likes her stories." It felt like more than just a passing comment. It felt like a clue. The cold knot of anger in my gut was still there, but now it was joined by something else. A flicker of intense, burning curiosity. Diana had started a war of words. She had built her attack around the concept of lies. It was an interesting choice of weapon. I had a sudden, sinking feeling that she had chosen it for a reason, and I was going to find out why. The rest of the wedding passed in a blur of forced smiles and determined celebration. I danced with Mark. I laughed with my friends. I ate the cake. From the outside, I was the picture of a happy bride. But inside, every time I caught a glimpse of Diana holding court, her silver dress shimmering under the lights, I felt the chill return. The war had begun, and she had fired the first shot. But I would be the one to fire the last. Our honeymoon was supposed to be 2 weeks of sun and sand in a place where our only responsibility was to each other. For the first few days, we managed it. We swam in the turquoise water, walked along the beach hand in hand, and tried to recapture the pure joy we'd felt before Diana's speech. But her words were like a ghost, haunting the edges of our happiness. I would find myself replaying the moment in my head while staring out at the ocean. I would hear her voice in the quiet moments before sleep. Finally, on our 4th night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. We were sitting on the balcony of our hotel room, listening to the waves crash below. "I can't stop thinking about what your mom said," I began, my voice quiet. Mark sighed. He had been waiting for this. He put his drink down and turned to face me. "Laura, I know. It was awful. I'm so sorry." "Why would she say that, Mark?" I asked, my voice pleading. "Why about lying? Does she think I've lied to her?" "No, of course not," he said quickly. "It had nothing to do with you. I promise." "Then what was it about?" I pressed. She was looking right at me. She wanted to hurt me. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was stressed. She wasn't thinking, he said, falling back on the family's default excuse for Diana. She just says things sometimes. It comes out wrong. It didn't sound wrong, I countered. It sounded very deliberate. She said you finally found someone who doesn't lie. Who was she talking about? Mark looked away, staring out at the dark horizon. It was probably about Tiffany, he mumbled. Tiffany was his ex-girlfriend, the one he was with for 3 years before we met. He rarely spoke about her, and I had never asked for details. It felt like ancient history. What did Tiffany lie about? I asked. He hesitated. It's complicated, Laura. It was a long time ago. It doesn't matter anymore. It seems to matter to your mother, I pointed out. And if she's going to compare me to her on my wedding day, then I think it matters to me too. He sighed again, this time with more frustration. Look, Tiffany wasn't honest about some things, financial things. She had a lot of debt she didn't tell me about. My mom found out. It was a big mess. Something about his explanation felt thin, incomplete. Your mom found out? How? I don't know, she just did. Mom is good at figuring things out, he said vaguely. Can we please just drop it? I don't want to spend our honeymoon talking about my ex-girlfriend and my mom. I wanted to push, to ask more questions, but I saw the closed-off look on his face. He was shutting down. For the sake of peace, for the sake of our honeymoon, I let it go. But his vague answers didn't reassure me. They did the opposite. They felt like evasions. He was protecting his mother, just as he always did. The conversation left me feeling more alone than before. The ghost of Tiffany was now sitting between us, and the long shadow of Diana stretched all the way to this tropical paradise. Her strategy was already working. She was creating a rift between us. When we returned home, the real world came rushing back in. There were thank you cards to write and gifts to unpack. It was a welcome distraction. One afternoon, while Mark was at work, I started sorting through the presents stacked in our living room. I came across a large, heavy box wrapped in elegant silver paper, the same silver as Diana's dress. It was from her. Inside was a heavy, leather-bound photo album. The cover was embossed with our names and our wedding date in gold leaf. It was an undeniably beautiful and thoughtful gift. I felt a flicker of guilt. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really had been a clumsy mistake. I opened the album. The first few pages were filled with professional photos from our wedding, which must have cost her a fortune to have printed so quickly. Then came pictures of Mark and me during our engagement. Following those were photos of Mark as a child, grinning with a missing tooth, covered in mud, proudly holding up a fish. They were adorable. I kept turning the pages, moving backward in time. Now there were photos of a young Diana and her husband, Mark's father, holding a baby Mark. Then pictures of just the two of them when they were young. And finally, the last section was dedicated to Diana's own youth. There were black and white photos of her as a girl, a teenager, a young woman. Underneath a picture of a smiling, confident-looking Diana in a cap and gown, there was a small typed caption pasted onto the page. It read, "Celebrating my graduation from Princeton University, 1985. A day of pride." I stared at the photo. Diana, a Princeton graduate? Mark had never mentioned that. In all the time I had known him, in all the conversations we'd had about our backgrounds and our families, he had never once said his mother was an Ivy League graduate. It was the kind of detail a proud son would surely mention. I read the caption again. Princeton University, 1985. It felt wrong. I couldn't explain the feeling. It was a deep, instinctual sense of dissonance. It was like a puzzle piece that was almost the right shape but wouldn't quite fit, no matter how you turned it. Why would she make such a public, vicious statement about lying and then present me with this album, with this very specific, very impressive claim? It was almost as if she were daring me to question her, daring me to dig. The old aunt's words came back to me. She likes her stories. I closed the album slowly. The cold knot was back in my stomach, tighter than ever. This was the catalyst. This was the thread. Diana had built her identity, her authority in the family, on being a certain kind of person. Intelligent, discerning, a woman whose judgment was not to be questioned. A woman who could spot a liar like Tiffany. A woman who went to Princeton. But what if the story wasn't true? What if the biggest liar in the family wasn't Tiffany? Or me, but Diana herself? The thought was staggering, but it made a terrifying kind of sense. It would explain the projection, the obsession with honesty. It would explain everything. I sat there in the quiet of our new home, the beautiful, expensive album in my lap, and I knew what I had to do. I had to find out the truth. The idea took root in my mind and refused to leave. The Princeton photo. The caption. Mark's silence on the subject. It all felt too strange to be a coincidence. My first step was embarrassingly simple. Something a teenager would do. I sat down at my laptop and typed Princeton University Alumni Directory into the search bar. A website popped up, an official-looking portal for alumni. It had a search function. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was silly. I was probably about to confirm her story and feel like a paranoid fool. I typed in her name, Diana Miller. I selected the class year, 1985. I hit enter. No results found. Okay, that was anticlimactic. It could mean anything. Maybe the online directory was incomplete. Maybe she was listed under her maiden name. I didn't actually know her maiden name. It was a strange gap in my knowledge about my own mother-in-law. I made a mental note. I would have to ask Mark. I tried a broader search, just her name without the year. Still nothing. I tried variations. D. Miller, Diana M. Nothing. A tiny seed of doubt began to sprout. It was just a public database, I told myself. It wasn't definitive proof of anything, but it was something. The next evening, I found my opportunity to ask Mark. We were making dinner together, chopping vegetables side by side. I decided to approach it casually. Hey, I was looking through that amazing album your mom gave us again. I started, keeping my tone light. Those old photos are incredible. I didn't know your mom went to Princeton. That's so impressive. Mark's face lit up with pride, just as I had expected. Oh, yeah, he said, beaming. She's brilliant. She was top of her class, I think. Majored in art history. The story was getting more detailed. Top of her class. Art history. These were specific, verifiable facts, and they were facts he was delivering with complete, unwavering confidence. He believed it. He had probably been told this story his entire life. Wow, I said, shaking my head as if in awe. I'm surprised you never mentioned it. He shrugged. I don't know. Mom doesn't like to brag about it much. This struck me as the most unbelievable part of the whole story. Diana, not bragging? It was contrary to every interaction I'd ever had with her. What was her maiden name? I asked, trying to sound offhand, as if the thought had just occurred to me. I was just thinking, if I ever meet any of her old college friends, I'd need to know. Oh, it was Jansen, he said without hesitation. Diana Jansen. I filed the name away. Diana Jansen. Later that night, after Mark was asleep, I crept back to my laptop. My hands were trembling slightly. This felt sneaky, duplicitous. But then I remembered her face at the wedding, that cold, triumphant look in her eyes. My resolve hardened. I went back to the alumni directory. I typed in Diana Jansen, class of 1985. No results found. I tried again. Jansen, Diana. D. Jansen. I searched the entire database of alumni from the 1980s for anyone with that name. Nothing. Not a single match. The seed of doubt was now a rapidly growing vine, wrapping itself around my insides. It was possible she had requested to be unlisted, I reasoned. Some people value their privacy, but it seemed unlikely for a woman who put a caption in a photo album about it. My mind was racing. How could I find out for sure? An online directory wasn't enough. I needed something concrete. An idea began to form. I could call the university's registrar's office. They handle academic records. They would know for sure. The next day, my hands were shaking as I dialed the number for the office of the registrar at Princeton University. I had rehearsed my story. I was a potential employer doing a background check. It was a lie, and the irony was not lost on me. I was using a lie to uncover a suspected lie. A polite-sounding woman answered the phone. Registrar's office, how can I help you? Hello, I said, my voice higher than usual. I'm calling from a recruitment firm to verify a candidate's educational background. Okay, the woman said. I can help with that. What is the name of the individual? Diana Jansen, I said, spelling it out for her. She would have graduated in 1985. I heard the clacking of a keyboard. It felt like the loudest sound in the world. Each second stretched into an eternity. I held my breath. I'm sorry, the woman said after a moment. I have no record of a Diana Jansen graduating in 1985. My heart leaped into my throat. Oh, I said, trying to sound disappointed. Perhaps she was enrolled under a different name? Her married name is Miller. Let me check that for you, she said patiently. More typing, more waiting. No, I'm not seeing a Diana Miller in that graduating class either. Could you perhaps check enrollment records for the years leading up to that? Say, from 1981 to 1985? I was pushing my luck, but I had to be sure. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. Ma'am, I have no record of any student named Diana Jansen or Diana Miller ever being enrolled at Princeton University. The words hit me like a physical blow. It was true. The whole thing was a lie. A massive 40-year-long fabrication that she had built her entire identity on. Mark's pride, the family's awe, her air of intellectual superiority. It was all a sham. I see, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Thank you for your time. I hung up the phone and sat there in stunned silence. This was so much bigger than a badly worded toast. This was a colossal deception that went to the very core of who she was, or at least who she pretended to be. The woman who called me a liar was herself living a lie. My anger from the wedding returned, but now it was sharper, colder. This wasn't just about a personal insult anymore. This was about the truth. Diana had constructed a false reality and expected everyone, including her son, to live in it. She had used that false authority to judge me, to humiliate me. I knew I couldn't confront her with just a phone call. She would deny it. She would call me a liar again, and this time she would have more ammunition. She would say I was crazy, that I was trying to tear the family apart. Mark would be caught in the middle. And without concrete proof, he would likely side with the story he had been told his entire life. I needed more. I needed something undeniable. And I had a feeling I knew where to start looking. I remembered the wedding guest, the old aunt who had warned me about Diana's stories. Aunt Carol. Mark had said the family didn't talk to her much because Diana found her difficult. Of course she did. Carol probably knew the truth. I had to find her. Finding Aunt Carol wasn't difficult. She was Mark's father's sister, and her name was distinct enough that a quick search on social media brought up her profile. Her page was filled with pictures of her garden and her 2 golden retrievers. She looked kind, with the same gentle eyes as the woman I remembered from the wedding. I hesitated for a long time before clicking the message button. This felt like a huge step, like I was officially crossing a line from private suspicion to active investigation. I was involving another family member, potentially stirring up old conflicts. But then I thought of Diana's smug smile and the shame I felt sitting at my own wedding reception. My hesitation vanished. I typed out a simple, polite message. Hello, Carol. This is Laura, Mark's wife. We met briefly at the wedding. I was hoping I might be able to talk to you sometime. I'd love to get to know Mark's side of the family better. It was vague but friendly. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. To my surprise, she responded within an hour. Laura, how lovely to hear from you. I would be delighted to meet. How about coffee this week? We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our houses. I was a bundle of nerves the entire morning. What was I going to say? Hi, nice to meet you, by the way. Is your sister-in-law a pathological liar? I needed a more delicate approach. When I walked into the cafe, Carol was already there, sitting at a small table by the window. She greeted me with a warm smile. Laura, it's so good to see you again, and under much calmer circumstances, she said, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. It's great to see you too, Carol, I said, sitting down. Thank you for meeting me. We ordered our coffees and made small talk for a few minutes about the wedding, my new life with Mark, her dogs. She was easy to talk to, genuine and funny. Finally, I decided to take the plunge. Carol, I started, trying to keep my voice even. I hope this isn't too forward, but at the wedding, you said something to me that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She raised an eyebrow, interested. Oh, what was that? You told me not to mind Diana, I said. You said she likes her stories. Carol's smile faded slightly. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes studying my face. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully. Yes, she said finally. I suppose I did say that. I was wondering what you meant by it. I pressed gently. She let out a long, quiet sigh, as if a weight she had been carrying for years was settling on her shoulders again. Laura, she said, her voice dropping. You're a smart girl. I could see that the moment I met you. And I saw what Diana did at the reception. It was cruel, and it was typical. So she does this kind of thing often? I asked. Diana, Carol began, choosing her words with precision, has spent her entire adult life building a very specific image of herself. She wants to be seen as sophisticated, intelligent, and morally superior to everyone around her. She uses that image to control people. My brother, Mark, she's had them under her thumb for decades. My heart was pounding. This was it. Her stories, Carol continued, are the foundation of that image. And the biggest story of all, her magnum opus, is the one about Princeton. I held my breath. So it's not true? I whispered. Carol shook her head, a sad, knowing look on her face. My dear, Diana never even finished her first semester at the local community college. She met my brother, got pregnant with Mark fairly quickly, and that was the end of her academic career. But she couldn't stand the thought of being just a housewife. She wanted more. She wanted prestige. So she invented it. A wave of validation and anger washed over me. I wasn't crazy. It was all real. Why has no one ever called her out on it? I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. Oh, I did, Carol said with a bitter little laugh. About 20 years ago at a family Christmas party. She was going on and on about her thesis advisor at Princeton, and I'd had enough. I said, Diana, for heaven's sake, you went to Northwood Community for 6 months. Who are you kidding? What happened? I asked, leaning forward. It was a catastrophe, she recalled. She burst into tears. She accused me of being jealous, of trying to destroy her. My brother, bless his conflict-avoidant heart, told me I had to apologize. Mark, who was just a boy, was completely bewildered. Diana told him I was a bitter, mean-spirited woman who told lies to hurt people. She looked me straight in the eye. She painted me as the liar to protect her own lie, and she cut me out of the family. It became easier for everyone to just go along with the story than to deal with the fallout of challenging her. So the story became truth. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Diana had a playbook. She had used this exact tactic before. Accuse the truth-teller of being the liar, isolate them. It was what she was trying to do to me. She warned me you were difficult, I admitted. Carol snorted. Difficult means I don't play her games. Be careful, Laura, she warned, her expression turning serious. You're a threat to her. You're smart. You're independent, and Mark loves you. That means you have power, and Diana can't stand anyone having power but her. She will try to destroy you before she lets you expose her. The warning settled heavily in my chest. I believed her. And as if on cue, Diana's campaign against me began that very week. It started subtly. She would call Mark when she knew he was on his way home from work, planting little seeds of doubt. "Mark, darling," I overheard him say on the phone one evening. "No, Laura's right here." "What?" "No, the house is clean." He gave me an apologetic look. After he hung up, he explained, "Mom was just worried you were feeling overwhelmed with the new house. She offered to hire a cleaner for us." "That's a nice offer," I said, my voice tight. But it felt more like she was saying I'm not doing a good job. "No, honey, you're reading too much into it," he said, ever the peacemaker. But it didn't stop. A few days later, Diana dropped by unannounced with a lasagna. "I was just so worried you two weren't eating properly," she announced cheerfully. "Laura is so slim. I worry she doesn't have time to cook a proper meal." The implication was clear. I was failing as a wife. I was not taking care of her son. The most insidious attacks were about my relationship with Mark. She would call him and complain that she never got to see him anymore. "It's just that Laura is so busy with her friends," she would tell him, a complete fabrication. "I worry he's getting isolated from his family." Mark, caught in the middle, grew tense and irritable. The easy comfort between us was being replaced by a constant, low-level stress. We started having small, pointless arguments about his mother. "She's just trying to be involved," he would argue. "No, Mark, she's trying to control us," I would insist. "She's trying to turn you against me." "That's a horrible thing to say about my mother," he'd retort, his voice rising. "She loves me. She loves you." I wanted to scream, "She's lying to you. She has been lying to you your entire life." But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Carol's story had taught me that. Without irrefutable proof, I would just be the difficult, jealous new wife trying to cause trouble. Diana would win. Again. The pressure was immense. I felt like I was living in a house with slowly contracting walls. Diana's constant intrusions, her passive-aggressive attacks, and Mark's frustrating blindness to it all were wearing me down. I had sleepless nights, replaying conversations, trying to figure out my next move. The Princeton lie was the key. I knew it. But a phone call to a registrar and a conversation with an estranged aunt weren't enough to dismantle a 40-year deception. I needed something physical, something tangible, something Diana couldn't possibly deny. Carol's words echoed in my mind. She cut me out of the family. Diana had a history of destroying relationships to protect her fantasy world. I realized with a sickening certainty that she was trying to do the same to my marriage. She saw me as a threat, and her goal was to neutralize me by severing my connection to Mark. The sleepless nights weren't just from stress anymore. They were filled with a growing sense of urgency. I wasn't just fighting for my own dignity anymore. I was fighting for my husband and my marriage. I had to escalate my search. I needed a smoking gun. The idea came from another piece of my conversation with Carol. She had mentioned, almost as an aside, she used to have a box of old papers in the attic at her house. Your father-in-law called it her box of dreams. A box of dreams. It sounded so whimsical, so harmless. But in my mind, it sounded like a box of evidence. The problem was getting to it. I couldn't just walk into my mother-in-law's house and demand to see her attic. I needed an opportunity, a reason to be in the house with a plausible excuse to be alone upstairs. Diana, in her campaign to prove what a wonderful, involved mother-in-law she was, provided one for me. She insisted on hosting a family dinner. Just a small, intimate gathering, she had told Mark over the phone, so I can get to know Laura's parents better. It was a power move, a way to put me on display and evaluate my family on her home turf. I dreaded it, but I also saw the opening it created. The night of the dinner was tense. My parents, bless them, were polite and friendly, completely oblivious to the undercurrents of drama. Diana was in her element, playing the gracious hostess, pouring expensive wine, and telling charming stories. She even made a self-deprecating joke about her silly speech at the wedding, waving it away as a moment of over-emotional nonsense. She was trying to rewrite history, to gaslight me into thinking I had imagined the malice. I smiled politely, but inside, my resolve hardened into steel. After the main course, as Diana was starting to clear the plates, I saw my chance. "That was a delicious meal, Diana," I said, standing up. "Would you mind if I used the restroom upstairs? The one downstairs has a bit of a line." My mother was indeed heading for the guest bathroom. It was the perfect excuse. "Of course, dear," Diana said, barely looking up from the plates. "You know where it is." My heart began to pound against my ribs. This was it. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my steps feeling unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. I passed the guest bathroom and continued down the hall to the very end, where a small, unassuming door was set into the ceiling. The attic hatch. A small cord dangled from it. My hands were clammy. This felt like a monumental violation of privacy. But then I pictured her face, twisted with false sincerity as she called me a liar in front of everyone I knew. This wasn't a violation. It was a search for the truth she had tried so hard to bury. I pulled the cord. The hatch creaked open, and a folding wooden ladder descended with a soft thud. I paused, listening for any sounds from downstairs. All I could hear was the distant murmur of conversation and the clinking of dishes. I took a deep breath and climbed. The attic was exactly as you'd expect. Hot, stuffy, and smelling of dust and old wood. A single bare bulb cast a weak yellow light over a landscape of forgotten things. There were old suitcases, boxes of Christmas decorations, and stacks of old furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts. Carol had said Diana's father-in-law called it her box of dreams. It was likely labeled something innocuous. I started scanning the boxes, my eyes darting from one to the next. Mark's schoolwork, holiday photos, kitchenware. Then I saw it. Tucked away behind a stack of old magazines was a cardboard box that was noticeably less dusty than the others. On the side, written in neat cursive handwriting, were the words, "Personal memorabilia." This had to be it. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a collection of old yearbooks from Diana's high school. I flipped through one. Her picture was there, a pretty girl with ambitious eyes. I glanced at the class prophecy section. Under her name, it said, "Most likely to marry a rich man." There was no mention of academic brilliance. I dug deeper. Underneath the yearbooks were old report cards. I unfolded one. The paper was brittle. Her grades were mostly C's with a few B's in English and history. They were perfectly average. There was nothing to suggest a future Princeton scholar. Then I found what I was looking for. It was a thin folder. Inside was an acceptance letter, not from Princeton, but from Northwood Community College, just as Carol had said. There was also a transcript. It showed she had enrolled in 2 classes, Introduction to Sociology and English Composition 101. Her final grades were a C in sociology and an incomplete in English. She had dropped out before the first semester even ended. This was it. This was the proof. I had found the heart of her biggest lie. I felt a surge of triumph, but it was quickly followed by something else. Digging further into the box, I found a stack of papers that didn't seem to belong with the rest. They were bank statements, dating back over the last 15 years. They were for an account at a different bank from the one she and Mark's father used, and the account was in her name only. Her maiden name, Diana Jansen. Curiosity overriding caution, I looked at the statements. What I saw made my blood run cold. Every month, there was a transfer, usually for a few $1,000s from a joint account. One I recognized from a check Mark's father had once written us, into this secret account. She was systematically siphoning money from their shared finances, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the withdrawals. There were payments to high-end clothing stores, luxury spas, and car dealerships. And then I saw them. Transfers to Mark. One was labeled graduation gift. Another was down payment help. I remembered Mark telling me how his mom had helped him with the down payment on his first condo, how she had given him a generous check when he graduated from his master's program. He had always spoken of it with such gratitude. "Mom is so smart with her investments," he'd say. "She's been helping me out for years." The ugly truth crashed down on me. She wasn't giving him money from her savvy investments. She was taking his own father's money, hiding it, and then gifting it back to her son to buy his loyalty and admiration. She was recycling the family's wealth to make herself look generous and successful. The Princeton lie was about her ego, a fantasy to make her feel important. But this was an active, malicious deception. She was stealing from her husband and manipulating her son. I felt sick. I quickly took out my phone and, with shaking hands, took pictures of everything. The community college transcript, the bank statements showing the transfers from the joint account, the statements showing the gifts to Mark. I captured it all, my phone's camera flash looking like lightning in the dim attic. I carefully put everything back in the box, pushed it back into its hiding place, closed the attic hatch, and went back downstairs. When I re-entered the dining room, Diana looked at me, a slight hint of suspicion in her eyes. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked. "You were gone for a while." I met her gaze, my expression calm, my heart hammering. "Just fine," I said, giving her a small, tight smile. "Just had to freshen up." She held my gaze for a second longer, searching for something, but then my father asked her a question about the wine and her attention shifted. She was the gracious hostess again. But I knew everything, and I had the proof in my pocket. The game had changed. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was going to liberate my husband from a lifetime of manipulation. And I was going to burn her fantasy world to the ground. The days following the dinner party were the calm before the storm. On the outside, I was placid, going about my life as a newlywed. But on the inside, I was a coiled spring of righteous fury. I had the evidence on my phone, a digital bomb waiting to be detonated. The question was not if, but when and how. My first priority was Mark. This revelation was going to shatter the image he had of his mother. It was going to hurt him deeply, and I needed to handle it with care. He was a victim in this as much as I was. His love and loyalty had been weaponized against him. I waited for a quiet evening, a few days after the dinner. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie, but I knew neither of us was really paying attention. The tension in our house had become a constant humming presence. I paused the movie and turned to him. "Mark, we need to talk," I said softly. He immediately looked wary. "If this is about my mom again." "It is," I said. "But you need to listen to me. Really listen. And you need to look at what I'm about to show you with an open mind." His expression hardened. "Laura, I'm tired of this. You're obsessed with finding fault with her." "Am I?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "Or am I the only one willing to see what's right in front of us?" I took out my phone. "Your mother called me a liar at our wedding," I began. "She has spent the last month trying to convince you that I'm incompetent and trying to isolate you. She's doing it because she's terrified. She's terrified that I'll find out the truth about her." "The truth about what?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. Instead of answering, I showed him the first picture, the acceptance letter from Northwood Community College. He squinted at it. "What is this?" "That's an acceptance letter for your mother," I explained. "From a community college, from 1980. Then I showed him the picture of her transcript, the C and the incomplete. He stared at the phone, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand. Mom went to Princeton." "No, Mark," I said gently. "She didn't. I called the university. They have no record of her ever even applying, let alone graduating. This is her entire college career. 6 weeks at a community college. He snatched the phone from my hand, scrolling through the pictures as if trying to will them into being something else. He was shaking his head, a look of profound disbelief on his face. No, this is a mistake. This has to be some other Diana Jansen. It isn't, I said, but that's not the worst part. His eyes were wide with a mixture of anger and fear. He didn't want to believe me. He couldn't comprehend a world where his mother was a liar. Look at the next pictures, I urged him. With trembling hands, he swiped to the bank statements. I walked him through it, pointing out the dates, the names on the accounts, the flow of money. I showed him the transfers from the joint account he shared with his father. Then I showed him the withdrawals. Remember when your mom helped you with the down payment on your condo? I asked softly. I swiped to the statement showing a transfer to his account for $10,000. This is where it came from, not her investments. It was your father's money. She just moved it through a secret account first. I showed him the payment for his graduation gift, the money for the car he thought she'd helped him buy. One by one, I dismantled the pillars of her supposed generosity. Mark sank back into the couch, the phone slipping from his fingers. He looked pale, as if he was going to be sick. He stared at the blank television screen, his expression utterly broken. For a long time, he said nothing. The only sound in the room was his ragged breathing. She stole from Dad? He finally whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. And she lied to me? My whole life? Yes, I said, my heart aching for him. I moved closer and put a hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. The Princeton thing. I used to brag about that to my friends, he said, a look of dawning horror on his face. I was so proud of her. I know, I said. That's what she wanted. She wanted you to be proud. She wanted you to adore her. She built a fantasy, Mark, and she made you live in it with her. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a terrible, dawning clarity. He was finally seeing it. The passive-aggressive comments, the constant need for control, the wedding speech. It all clicked into place. It was the behavior of a deeply insecure person terrified of being exposed. That day, he said, his voice cracking, at the wedding, she called you a liar. It's what she does, I finished for him. It's what she did to your Aunt Carol. Anyone who gets too close to the truth becomes the liar. It's her only defense. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. He looked utterly lost. What do we do? He asked, his voice small like a child's. We stop playing the game, I said, my voice firm. We don't let her control the narrative anymore. We are going to confront her, but we are going to do it together, and we are going to do it on our terms. He looked at the phone, then back at me. The hurt was still there, but something else was hardening in his eyes. Resolve. He finally understood who the real enemy was. It wasn't me. It was the woman who had manipulated him his entire life. Okay, he said, nodding slowly. Okay, what's the plan? The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. Diana's 60th birthday was a month away, and she was planning a massive, ostentatious party at an expensive country club. It was, in her own words, the event of the season. She was flying in relatives from out of state and had invited all of her influential friends. It was designed to be the ultimate showcase of her perfect life, her social standing, and her wonderful family. It was the perfect stage for her downfall. In the weeks leading up to the party, a new dynamic formed between Mark and me. We were a team. The tension that had plagued our home was gone, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Mark started seeing his mother's manipulations with painful clarity. He noticed every backhanded compliment, every attempt to triangulate, every little lie she told. He started politely but firmly pushing back, creating boundaries she had never encountered from him before. No, Mom, we're not available that night, he'd say, without offering a litany of excuses. Laura and I have plans. No, Mom, you don't need to help us organize our finances. We have it under control. Diana was bewildered by this new, united front. Her tactics weren't working anymore. She became more desperate, her calls more frequent, her tone more demanding. She blamed me, of course. She told Mark I was changing him, turning him against her. But this time, her words had no power. Mark saw them for what they were, the frantic flailings of a puppeteer whose strings had just been cut. Our plan was simple, and it was brutal. We wouldn't cause a scene out of nowhere. We would let Diana build her own pedestal, and then we would calmly and methodically kick it out from under her. The night of the party, the country club ballroom was glittering. A string quartet was playing in the corner. Women in expensive gowns and men in dark suits mingled, sipping champagne. And at the center of it all was Diana, glowing in a custom-made gown, accepting compliments and adoration like a queen. She looked happier than I had ever seen her. She believed she had won. She believed this party was the ultimate testament to her success. Mark and I found our assigned table. His father was there, looking proud and happy for his wife. Aunt Carol was also there, a surprising and welcome sight. She caught my eye and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mark must have insisted she be invited, a quiet rebellion Diana had been forced to accept. About an hour into the party, after the dinner and several effusive toasts from her friends, Diana took the microphone herself to thank everyone for coming. Then she opened the floor for people to share memories. It was then that one of her oldest friends, a woman named Margaret, stood up. "Diana, darling," Margaret began, "I'll never forget our college days. Or rather, my college days, and your far more glamorous adventures. I was stuck in a library in Ohio while you were at Princeton, hobnobbing with intellectuals and future world leaders. You always were in a different league." A ripple of appreciative laughter went through the crowd. This was it. The perfect setup. Diana beamed, soaking in the praise. "Oh, Margaret, you flatter me," Diana said into the microphone, feigning modesty. "It wasn't all glamorous. I spent my fair share of time in the Firestone Library, I assure you. My art history thesis nearly did me in." My heart was hammering. This was our cue. I gave Mark a look. He took a deep breath and stood up. The room quieted, expecting the adoring son to give a heartfelt speech. "Mom," Mark began, his voice clear and steady. "That's amazing to hear you talk about your thesis. Laura and I were just talking about that the other day." He turned to me. "Laura is a researcher by trade, you know. She was so inspired by your story that she wanted to read your thesis." All eyes turned to me. I stood up, keeping my expression neutral and pleasant. Diana's smile tightened at the corners. She looked like a cornered animal. "That's right," I said, my voice carrying through the silent room. "I thought it would be a wonderful thing to read, Diana. I even contacted the university archives to see if I could get a copy. What was the title of it again?" I must have given them the wrong information. The room was dead silent. Every single person was staring at Diana, waiting for her answer. Her face, which had been glowing with triumph moments before, was now pale. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "The thesis, Mom?" Mark prompted, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "The one that nearly did you in? You must remember the title." Diana looked wildly from Mark to me. She saw no allies. She saw two people who knew the truth. This is it, I think. This is the moment everything changes. Her composure is cracking. I feel a cold sense of victory. I don't recall the exact title right now," she stammered, trying for a dismissive laugh that came out as a choked gasp. "It was so long ago. What a silly thing to bring up now." "I don't think it's silly," I said, my voice still calm, still pleasant. "Because when I spoke to the registrar at Princeton, they told me something very interesting. They said they had no record of a Diana Miller or a Diana Jansen ever attending the university. Not for a semester, not for a day." A collective gasp went through the room. Friends and family members exchanged shocked, confused glances. Diana's face crumpled. The mask of the elegant, intelligent matriarch was gone, replaced by the raw, terrified face of a fraud. "That's a lie," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's lying. She has always been a liar. Mark, tell them. Tell them she's a vicious, jealous liar who is trying to ruin my life." The words were almost identical to the ones Carol had described her using 20 years ago. It was her final, desperate play. But this time, it wouldn't work. Mark didn't look at her. He looked at the crowd of stunned faces. "My wife is not a liar," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "But for 40 years, we have all been living inside of one. A lie about a university, a lie about a life that never happened." Then he turned his gaze to his father. "And I'm sorry, Dad, but it gets worse. It's not just lies about school. It's lies about money. Your money." Mark's father looked utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about, son?" Diana let out a sob. "Don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's saying. Laura has poisoned him against me." I stepped forward. I wasn't going to let her spin this. "Is it a lie that you've been moving thousands of dollars every month from your joint account into a secret account under your maiden name?" I asked, my voice cutting through her hysterics. "Is it a lie that the money you gifted to Mark for his condo, for his graduation, for his car, was actually his own father's money that you had stolen and hidden?" The accusation hung in the air, heavier and more damning than anything about Princeton. The lie about the degree was about vanity. The lie about the money was a betrayal of the deepest kind. Mark's father stared at Diana, his face ashen. The look in his eyes was one of dawning, horrifying comprehension. He finally saw the woman he had been married to for over 3 decades for who she truly was. "Diana," he whispered, his voice cracking, "is this true?" Diana just stood there, exposed and broken under the glittering lights of the party she had thrown for herself. She didn't answer. She just sobbed. Great, heaving, ugly sobs. She had no more words, no more stories. The truth, stark and brutal, had finally silenced her. The queen's reign was over. Her kingdom, built on a foundation of lies, had crumbled to dust around her. And the entire world she had worked so hard to impress was there to witness it. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Diana, still sobbing, was led out of the ballroom by 2 of her bewildered friends. Mark's father, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in 2 minutes, followed them, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The party guests, not knowing what else to do, began to leave in a quiet, awkward flood. They avoided my eyes and Mark's, murmuring excuses as they scurried away from the wreckage. The string quartet had stopped playing. The only sound was the scraping of chairs and the low hum of gossip starting to bubble up. Aunt Carol came over to our table. She placed a hand on my arm and one on Mark's shoulder. Her face was a mixture of sadness and vindication. "I knew this day would come eventually," she said softly. "I'm just sorry it had to be so public, so painful." "It was the only way," Mark said, his voice hollow. "She would have denied it forever if we had done it in private. She needed everyone to hear it." "You did the right thing," Carol affirmed. "Both of you. You brought the truth into the light. It's a painful light, but it's better than living in the dark." She squeezed his shoulder. "Your father will need you. And if you need anything, you know where I am." She gave me a long, meaningful look. "Thank you, Laura." I just nodded, feeling emotionally drained. There was no triumph, no elation. Just a profound, quiet emptiness. We had won, but the victory felt heavy. The drive home was silent. Mark stared out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. I didn't know what to say. I had helped him tear down the biggest myth of his life. When we got back to our house, he finally spoke. "I feel numb," he said, sinking onto the couch. "Like none of it was real. My whole childhood. All those times I was so proud of her, it was all based on nothing. It was based on her insecurity, I said, sitting beside him. It wasn't about you, Mark. It was all about her. You were just a prop in her play. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, aching sadness. She really did steal from Dad. She stole from us. Yes, I said. She did. My father called me while you were in the car, he said. He's at a hotel. He said he can't go home. He can't even look at her. He let out a shaky breath. He asked me if I had proof about the bank accounts. We do, I said. I have the pictures. He's going to talk to a lawyer on Monday, Mark said, his voice flat. He said, the marriage is over, the lies are over. The finality of it hung in the air between us. This wasn't just a family argument. This was the end of a family as it had existed for over 30 years. A few days later, Mark's father came over. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear for the first time. He and Mark sat at the dining table, and I laid out the evidence for him. Printouts of the bank statements, a clear trail of deception. He examined them in silence, his jaw tight. When he was done, he looked at me. Laura, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to apologize for not seeing it, for what she did to you at the wedding. I was blind. I spent 35 years enabling a fantasy because it was easier. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, I said. She's very good at what she does. Not anymore, he said grimly. He turned to his son. Mark, we'll get through this. The divorce was swift and messy. The financial deception made it impossible for Diana to claim much. She lost the house, her social standing, and her husband. Her so-called friends, the ones who had admired her Princeton intellect and business acumen, vanished. They didn't want to be associated with a fraud and a thief. She was left with a small apartment and a reputation in tatters. Mark and I had to navigate our own new reality. His grief for the mother he thought he had was real. We talked for hours, night after night. He told me stories from his childhood, re-examining them through this new, harsh lens. The surprise trips she took him on. The expensive gifts she bought for him with her investment money. He was mourning a fiction, and it was a painful process. But through it all, we grew closer. Our marriage, forged in this fire, became stronger and more honest than I could have ever imagined. We were a team, bound by a truth we had fought for together. About 6 months after the party, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it. I hope you're happy now that you've ruined my life. It was Diana. The message was so typical of her. No apology, no remorse, just blame. She still saw herself as the victim. She still believed I was the villain who had torn down her beautiful sandcastle, not the architect of the lie that it was built on. I stared at the message, and I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing but a quiet sense of finality. I thought about her speech at my wedding, the way she had tried to brand me as a liar. She had chosen the weapon, and it had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. She had spent her life terrified of being exposed as a fraud, and in trying to intimidate me, she had brought about her own greatest fear. I typed back a single, simple, honest reply. I am. Then I blocked her number. I deleted the message. I turned to Mark, who was reading on the couch, and I smiled. The ghost was gone. The shadow had lifted. We were finally free. Our life was our own, built not on stories or deceptions, but on the simple, quiet truth. And it was more beautiful than any fantasy she could have ever invented.